us begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathering tonight. We pay our respects to the elders both past and present.
Hello, and a big welcome to the 2021 Marist Marian Lecture. My name is Hazel.
I'm Aiden.
And I'm Sophie, and we are the student leaders at St. Michael's Primary School in Daceyville, Sydney.
Let us pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, our Creator, we gather in your presence, conscious that our mission in this world is your mission. May we, like Mary, listen to your voice and ponder in our hearts the events and experiences of our lives.
May we have the courage to do what you ask of us. We ask this for the good of our brothers and sisters to whom we minister. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Good evening and welcome to our Marian Lecture for 2021. My name is Jasmine Brown and I'm a member of the Marist Association. It is my absolute pleasure on behalf of the Marist Association of St. Marcelin Champagne to welcome you all joining us here this evening. It is incredibly inspiring to see the number of registrations from our Marist communities, both nationally and abroad, and of course so many friends of Marist that are joining us here this evening. A very special welcome to our keynote speaker this evening, Christopher Lamb. Welcome, Chris, and good morning. Let me take a moment to introduce you to Christopher. Chris was born and grew up in London and studied theology at the University of Durham. After graduating, Chris pursued a career in journalism, first working for the Daily Telegraph before joining the internationally renowned Catholic publication, The Tablet, in 2009. During this time, Chris worked on a number of significant events, including Pope Benedict's visit to London in 2010, and then he was sent to Rome for the conclave that elected Pope Francis in 2013. Since 2015, Chris has been the Tablet's Vatican correspondent in Rome. In this time, he has worked on many reports very closely following the dramatic pontificate of Pope Francis. Chris has a very unique and intimate knowledge of Francis as he has travelled with him to many places, including Bangladesh, Uganda, Myanmar, Poland, and Sweden. It is this intimate knowledge that he has of Pope Francis that has led to the much anticipated recent release of his book titled The Outsider, Pope Francis and the Battle to Reform the Church. This title conveys a much thought-provoking image that we look forward to hearing more about tonight. Chris, we greatly appreciate you being with us this evening. We know that this has been a long time coming with our original postponement for 2020, but we look forward to hearing of your expertise and experiences tonight. So without further ado, coming to us from the morning in UK, we welcome you, Christopher Lamb.
Well, thank you very much, Jasmine, for that introduction, and thank you for this invitation to give the 2021 Marian Lecture. I'm delighted to be with you this evening and to gather around the table with the Marist family, albeit virtually. I have huge admiration for the work that the Marist do in education in the church, and always appreciate the Marist brothers and Marist leaders for their openness, wisdom, and sense of humour. So I hope that this evening we can have a discussion about the future of the church in that spirit that's open and honest. As was mentioned in the introduction, I am a journalist, professional journalist who spent a number of years covering the Vatican, but I'm also a person of faith, a Christian, a Catholic. I care deeply about the future of the church, not just for myself, but for my children and for coming generations. So I think the topic for tonight is extremely relevant to that. And the topic that I've been asked to look at is the post-COVID church crisis or opportunity in the context of Pope Francis's reforms, something that I've examined closely through my work at the tablet and in my book, The Outsider. I think the crisis that we are facing is a fork in the road. As the Pope says, we can come out of a crisis two ways, better or worse. But I believe strongly that the crisis offers the church an opportunity to rebuild and renew, and that's what I want to focus on this evening. I think, first of all, we have to face up to what's in front of us. As is the case for so many institutions, the pandemic has brutally exposed the difficulties already present in the church, particularly when it comes to passing on the faith to the next generation. The empty places of worship which we saw during the lockdown period, I think, must serve as a warning to what might happen in the future. People are leaving the church, monasteries and seminaries are closing. The closed churches should be a warning that the emptying out of the church will only continue unless reforms are made. Reforms that help the church show a different face of Christianity, a face of Christianity that shows a life-giving and life-changing faith. This, I believe, is at the heart of the Francis pontificate. As I argue in my book, The Outsider, the Pope has embarked on a gospel-based reform of the church. It's not about a new strategy document or a snazzy set of teaching materials, but it's offering a concrete framework for real renewal. In his manifesto for his papacy, Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis talks about keeping it simple when it comes to evangelization and passing on the faith, not to overcomplicate things. I think that's very important. One of the things that Pope Francis has modeled is a church that can more credibly witness to Jesus's message, a church that's less concerned about institutional prestige or power or Vatican protocols, but a church that's a field hospital ready to bind up the wounds of humanity. It's less of a fortress-style church, grand and imposing, but a church that comes down from its lofty position and pitches its tent among the people. And that's why Francis embraces and witnesses to a simple lifestyle, refusing to live in the apostolic palace and instead opting for a few rooms in the Vatican guest house, the Casa Santa Marta, much to the upset of people in the Vatican. It's why he's driven around in a Ford Fiesta, arranges for the COVID-19 vaccine to be given to some of the poorest people and refugees in Rome, and opens the Sistine Chapel up to the homeless. And it's why during the height of the pandemic, he walked out into a totally deserted St. Peter's Square and likened the plight of humanity to the disciples on the boat with Jesus during the storm. And he urged us and the world to have faith, reminding them that we will experience with Jesus on board that there will be no shipwreck. So I think we have to remember that during this crisis, and what Pope Francis is saying is have a trusting faith. He wants every institution of the church, every part of the institution of the church to be focused on missionary evangelization, to look outwards. I think for Francis, it means being compassionate, 3 C's, being compassionate to the plight of the marginalized, being close to people, but taking concrete steps in service. When we're faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are some people who say, well, look, let's just turn the clock back. We don't have the power to do that. We can't go back to the time of pre-COVID, a time that no longer exists. And neither can the church simply rely on external structures, important as they are, but it can't simply rely on those external structures or the old ways of doing things. What the Pope is saying is we need to go deeper into the heart of the gospel message. So in that spirit of going deeper, I'd like to offer 3 characteristics of the Francis leadership that I think can be applied to each local context. So the first is the Pope as a disruptor. Now, I would argue that Francis has been something of a compassionate disruptor in the church, challenging various mentalities, particularly the mentalities which says we've always done things this way. I remember a story early on in his pontificate. The Pope was seen in the Casa Santa Marta where he lives, and he was not wearing the white cassock, just wearing his ordinary clerical clothes. And a Monsignor came up to him and said, Holy Father, it's not permitted for the Pope to be seen without the white cassock. And Francis replied, says who? And kept on walking. So in a sense, the Pope has broken the mold. I think we see that when through his trips, his papal visits, he decides where he wants to go, but he's always going to the margins of the world, the places that you wouldn't expect. So his first trip was to Lampedusa in southern Italy, where thousands of migrants from North Africa were arriving. And he decided to make that trip after reading about their plight in the papers and the media. And he picked up the phone to Alitalia, the airlines, to book himself a ticket. The Vatican found out and said, "Look, sorry, that's not possible. We have to do this trip in the correct way." The point is that he wants the church to shake itself out of complacency. He's not challenging the status quo because he has some totally new message. It's because he wants to rediscover and help the church rediscover the radical nature of the gospel. So the Pope, as a disruptor, I think is an important message. He's not saying things have to just stay the same. He wants things to be shaken up, and that's what he said to young people in 2013 at World Youth Day. Some people got very worried about this in Rome when he said to young people, "Hagan lio," which means make a mess. I read that as I translate that as shake things up. Don't just settle for things as they are. And he told young people after the Youth Synod in 2018, take risks, even if it means making mistakes. Cast out the fears that paralyze you. So the second characteristic of the Francis leadership is to be missionary. Just before the conclave of 2013, the Pope gave a speech to the cardinals. It was a very important speech and one that helped him get elected, I believe. And he said in that speech that in the book of Revelation, we read that Jesus stands at the door and knocks to be allowed to be let in. But in the church, Francis says, it seems like Jesus is inside asking to be let out. So what the Pope is calling for is a church that looks outwards, that ends this self-referential attitude of constantly looking inwards and constantly lamenting problems and difficulties. He wants a church that looks out. And we've seen that through the global leadership that he's offered on a whole range of issues. Let's take protection of the environment and climate change. In his encyclical Laudato Si, he makes protection of the environment a moral issue, one that must be central to the church's mission. He argues that care for the planet must be linked to protection of the poorest. It is linked to protection of the poorest because it's the most vulnerable communities who are most likely to be affected by climate change. And what we see here is not Francis saying, well, you've got these political issues about climate change. They're really secondary to what the church is doing. No, he's saying that the social action of the church is at the heart of what the church does. It's not some dichotomy or some either or. His concern for the poorest communities and for the environment and for all the social issues that he talks about is not political, it's biblical. And after he was elected, when he was in the Sistine Chapel, when it was clear that he'd got all the votes, the cardinal next to him, Cardinal Humes from Brazil, said, "Don't forget the poor." And this, I think we can say, is a biblical injunction that Francis received. And when Cardinal Humes said, "Don't forget the poor," that was when the Pope decided, I'm going to call myself Pope Francis, the first Pope to be called after St. Francis of Assisi. So the missionary church is one that is always looking outwards, but one that is offering a prophetic voice to the world on the whole range of the social issues of the day. The third point, the third characteristic, is the peacemaker. The Pope, as we mentioned earlier, was the first to choose St. Francis of Assisi as his namesake. And Francis is holding up the model of St. Francis of Assisi to the world as a person of hope, as a figure of hope to the world. St. Francis of Assisi, of course, was renowned for his poverty, for his care for creation, and as a peacemaker. And we see this developed in the Pope's latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, brothers all, brothers and sisters all. And in that encyclical, the Pope offers a new type of politics, a new type of engaging with the world, one that's based on a common fraternity, on our common humanity. So to adapt the St. Francis prayer, that famous St. Francis prayer that I don't think was written by St. Francis, but was attributed to him, where there is populism, the Pope wants to focus on the needs of people. Where there is radical individualism, the Pope calls for solidarity. Where the free market dominates, the Pope calls for a fairer distribution of property. And where political opponents hate each other, he urges them to engage in dialogue. And where there is aggression and hostility on social media, the Pope calls for kindness, or to simply turn off your device. So at a time of increasing political and social polarization in our societies, I think that Francis's message that we can have disagreements, but that shouldn't lead to cancelling out each other, is absolutely crucial. And that's what Francis is trying to show as a peacemaker, as a bridge builder, as a person of dialogue in whatever situation is being faced. And this approach requires humility. St. Francis of Assisi, who of course came from a very wealthy family and gave up his chance to be a man of wealth and status to follow the gospel, had to give up a lot. It means a stripping away. And I think it means that the church itself has to strip away some of those things that have been a block or a barrier to witnessing to the gospel. And that's not easy. That living simply, that simplicity and humility is hard. And here we come to some of the opposition that Francis has faced, because his message has engendered opposition. Let's not be under any illusion. There is a battle for the soul of the church underway. As I write in my book, inside the church and in Rome, amongst some very wealthy circles in the church, particularly in the United States, there are people doing all they can to undermine this pontificate. Many are already campaigning for the next conclave, looking for a candidate who could reverse or slow down Francis's reforms. Now, the Pope is not perfect. I've never claimed that he hasn't made mistakes. He has made mistakes, but the opposition he's faced is something different. I would argue it is a form of guerrilla warfare. Each day, not each day, but regularly, he finds himself facing this opposition. And I think the opponents, in many respects, are like the modern day scribes and doctors of the law who attack Jesus for his willingness to break the mold, to eat with sinners and heal on the Sabbath day. I think while we should be aware of this opposition, and it's very important that we understand the tensions and the difficulties that the Pope has faced, and I document many of these instances, we should also recognize that the battle for the future of the church is different from ones in the past. Why? Because the Pope wants the involvement of ordinary Catholics, women, men, young people in particular, to be at the heart of the church's mission. It's no longer about a small group of officials in the Vatican making all the decisions, but instead the Pope is asking for lay people to be part of global and local discernment processes to work out the future of the church, to listen to the Holy Spirit. And he sees this as the synodal model of the church. Synodal meaning walking together, deciding together, It's less clerical, it's less hierarchical, and it's focused on mission. It's a new way of being the church. Now, this is already happening in many places of the world, including, and I think one of the leading examples we can see is in Australia with the plenary council. Rome, I know, sees this as one of the most important expressions of synodality anywhere in the world. And the outcomes of the plenary council, although I'm not an expert on it, have, I think, the potential to reshape the mission of the Catholic Church in Australia and to signal to other countries what is possible in terms of reforms, particularly in the areas of church governance and leadership and the role of women. What the Pope wants is churches in their countries to come up with credible pastoral strategies suited to their local context, while seeking answers to some of the burning questions that they are facing. And in light of COVID, the synodal model is only becoming more vital and needed. Now, of course, a local synod or simply a plenary council is not going to be some kind of magic bullet that's going to, or some magic solution that's going to sort out all the problems. It's not, but it's a start, and it's an opportunity to forge new paths and to help influence the entire church in the process. Now, just before Francis was elected, a cardinal in Milan, Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, who was a great leader of the church, he gave an interview. It was a year before Francis was elected. And he said that for the church, when he was looking at the problems of facing the church, he said, "Our culture has become old. Our churches and our religious houses are big and empty. The bureaucratic apparatus of the church grows. Our rites and our dress are pompous. Do these things, however, express what we are today?" And then Martini said, "I see in the church so much ash under the embers, and often I'm hit with a sense of impotence. How can we liberate the embers from the ash and reinvigorate the fires of love?" Now, I would say that over the last 8 years, Francis has done everything he can to blow into the embers and restart and rekindle the fire. Now, of course, turning the Catholic Church around, renewing the church, is like turning around an ocean liner. It's going to take time. The model of the church emerging post-COVID and during the Francis pontificate is bound to face setbacks, disappointments, and difficulties. But crucially, the journey has started and the boat has set sail. It's up to all of us to make sure that it keeps moving and to embrace this new moment of opportunity. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Chris. That was amazing, and so much conversation I think will spark from what you have shared with us this evening. We're going to take a moment now to ponder, for people to consider what resonates with them. And we encourage you to put questions in the chat. Our first question this evening comes from Cara.
Hi Christopher, my name is Cara from Marist Youth Ministry and Sacred Heart College in Adelaide. As a young woman who's grown up within the church, I would like to know what the future looks like for young women within the church and how women will be more actively welcomed and included into the church and its leadership beyond the plenary council.
Thank you, Cara. Over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Cara, and thank you for that question, because women are absolutely crucial to the future of the church. In fact, without women, there is no future of the church. I think we need to remember a few things. First of all, his approach has been to open up new lay ministries in the church. That includes women. And in fact, today, the Pope is announcing a new ministry of catechist, a new official recognition of catechists. Of course, catechists are working across the church, but this is actually officially recognizing that. So he sees women as leaders in the church, and he's opening up lay ministries distinct from ordination, which of course is another debate and an issue that is of course very live in the church, but I think he's saying he's not going to go down the route of ordaining women because of the potential divisions that would create. But he is trying to create lay ministries to see women in leadership positions. He's also tried to appoint and has appointed many female leaders in the Vatican, and including, for example, Sister Natalie Beckart, who is the first religious sister nun to work at the Synod of Bishops office in a very senior role there. Of course, it was an Australian, Rosemary Goldie, who was the first woman to have an executive position in the Vatican many years ago. So I think the Australian church can lead the way on this. But the other thing is he's delinking, or trying to delink, the idea that the only way you can make decisions or have power in the church is if you're ordained. So I think he's trying to open up the spaces for women to lead. And we already see women leading in Catholic schools and in parishes, etc., but it needs more official recognition. What could the future look like? Well, my hope is that we rediscover the leadership role of women that is very clear in the Bible and the scriptures and in the early church. We don't know yet what this looks like. It's got to navigate those people who don't want any change in this area. But it means giving official roles, giving women leadership and decision-making roles. And I think that in your lifetime, Cara, I hope to see a woman actually running the Vatican, and maybe even women being able to vote in a conclave that elects the Pope. So I think there's reasons to be hopeful, but there's a long way to go.
Thank you, Chris. And it's certainly inspiring that you have faith in us as Australian women to be leading that change in the church. Our second question tonight comes from Greg from Marist 180. Thanks, Greg.
My name's Gregory Americanos, and I work for Marist 180. Marist 180 is an organisation that strives to create positive change in the lives of our young people, families, and other groups of people that we work with. Personally, I work closely with asylum seekers trying to settle in Australia. So my question to you, Christopher, is what would Pope Francis have to say to Australians in light of our country's response to refugees, asylum seekers, and the plight of our First Nations peoples?
Well, thank you, Greg, for that question. First of all, on the question of First Nations people and Indigenous peoples, well, I mean, I'd like to quote and go back to something that Pope John Paul II said when he visited Australia back in 1986, when he was in Alice Springs, and he spoke to and addressed the First Nations peoples, saying, "You have lived in this land and fashioned a culture that endures to this day. The Spirit of God has been with you." I think Pope Francis would absolutely echo the words of Pope John Paul II from 1986. And Francis has put a specific focus on Indigenous peoples, particularly in the Amazon, wanting to have a church that is with an Amazonian face, that is Indigenous led, that is not just respectful to the indigenous, but integrating and in a dialogue with them. So I think the Pope would say to First Nations people, the Church stands with you and alongside you. Your suffering is the Church's suffering. And Francis himself at the Amazon Synod talked about a preferential option for Indigenous peoples. And on refugees and asylum seekers, well, the Pope has been bold and prophetic on this. His first trip out of Rome was to Lampedusa to stand in solidarity with migrants coming from North Africa. His policy is very simply a biblical one from the gospel. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. That's been his mantra from day one. It's a personal thing to him as well, because his grandparents left Italy to settle in Argentina, and they had a ticket to go on an ocean liner, and they were about to get on that ocean liner, and it sank. They didn't go on it. Their lives were saved. But he knows the perilous nature of people leaving their homelands in search of a better life. He knows about it personally. So for him, any policies that turn away refugees should be opposed, and he's been very clear on that. And it's not just a policy thing; it's something that's personal. And I think we need to, as a church, to talk about the personal stories of migrants, because all of us, I think, in our histories probably can look back and find migrant stories within our own family histories.
Thank you, Chris. Extremely important what you've shared there. Now to our young people, we're going to listen to some college leaders from St. Teresa's in Noosaville.
Hi, I'm Fran and this is Jo, and we're the college captains here at St. Teresa's in the sunny Noosaville in Queensland.
We're two young people who are connected with our faith and church, and we're just wondering a few things. I had a friend that was interested in becoming part of the Catholic Church, and we're wondering how we can make the church more inviting and engaging to new young people.
Here at St. Teresa's we have a program called Regen, which is a youth group where we can regenerate our spirit. And I was wondering what Pope Francis would say to young people about creating a more meaningful and engaging place in the church.
Well, thank you, Jo and Fran. I think, again, vitally important questions. And I think this is something that the Pope has looked at very closely through holding a synod on young people in 2018. And I think what the Pope and others are saying is that it's got to be young people who are leading the church. It shouldn't be church leaders telling the young people, oh, look, this is what you've got to do to evangelize. It should be young people taking a leading role. Of course, bishops and priests have a very important guidance and leadership position in that, but it is the young people who need to lead. And the Pope has said, the world and the church needs the leadership of young people. Don't just stand on the sidelines. So I think we need to put young people into a pole position when it comes to making the church more inviting and engaging. Second, I think the church needs to listen to young people, listen to a broad cross section. Listen to those young people who perhaps have walked away from the church or want to walk away, and be ready to be challenged and do things differently. The church, as a church, we've got to be open to criticism. Society is changing fast. I notice intergenerationally differences are growing and deepening, but the church can bridge that gap. So we need to welcome people, and we need to listen, and we need to welcome people regardless of their sexual orientation or identity in particular. And third, I think young people are attracted to the church's social justice message. It's important that we don't just present the church as an institution looking to the past, but the church has the radical message of Jesus, has a radical Christian message. And I think in those ways, that the Pope is, I think, talking about or trying to sow seeds for the future. It's not easy, but I think through listening, through putting young people in a leadership position, and through focusing on that social justice message, I think there's a way forward.
Thank you, Chris, certainly, and especially when we have young people like Fran and Joe leading the way with a program such as Regen within the schools. We're going to take some time now to gather our thoughts and think about anything that's emerging for us. What have you heard? What is resonating with you? Perhaps there's some challenges emerging or any other questions that might be surfacing. For our first question this evening, we have Elaine from Brisbane. Welcome, Elaine.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi.
There's been quite a few questions about young people. I'm in Catholic education, and I just want to focus on two words, which is the word you mentioned, dialogue. In Fratelli Tutti is a whole chapter on dialogue, and all the other terms is accompaniment, the sense of accompanying our and walking with. A lot of our schools have a whole variety of faiths and a real growth in no religion, particularly. We're seeing this in Australia. So I'm just interested in your comments around his term of dialogue and his term of accompaniment, because he does use that significantly, a church in dialogue with the world. So I would just be interested in your thoughts of what you've seen, because he has dialogue with many other faiths through his journey. Your thoughts that could help us in schools to sort of do this, become this church of disruption.
Well, thank you for the question. I think we should start with a theological principle that God wishes to enter into a dialogue with each person. So the dialogue that the church has is a reflection of what the dialogue that God wishes to have. So I think we shouldn't see dialogue as some kind of, we're just going to have a nice chat here. Dialogue is actually something that can deepen our own faith, challenge us, and I think open up new possibilities. So when I see what Francis has done with dialogue, let's say his dialogue with Muslim leaders, where he's produced joint documents, very important documents on condemning violence, on the role of faith in society, condemning extremism. He has achieved a lot, I think, through dialogue. He's shown what's possible. I'd like just to offer, though, an image here of the kind of dialogue that the Pope wants. Sometimes when the Church talks of dialogue, it's, well, you've all got to end up agreeing with me. You've all got to end up agreeing with our position. Whereas what Francis is showing is that he's willing to go across the street to make the effort to go over to the other person and listen to what they've got to say. And the image I wanted to share is the image of the Pope in Iraq, in Najaf, in a side alley, where the Pope was walking to go and meet with Ayatollah al-Sistani, the leader of Shia Islam. It wasn't the Ayatollah who'd been told, you've got to come to the Vatican at this time and walk through this door and be ready to meet the Pope here. It was the Pope getting out of his car, going down the alleyway in a side street in a city in Iraq and going to meet the Ayatollah. And I think that is a very powerful image, and one that I think can inspire us in our own dialogue with people of different faiths and different viewpoints.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to you, Elaine. From now coming from Sydney, Liz. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you very much, Jazz. Thank you very much, Chris. Terrific insights and comments that you've made so far. One thing I wanted to ask about, there were quite a lot of references in your book, and also you've touched on it in a number of ways this evening, about the effect that the structure of the church might have on its ability to affect change. And my question is really, given the size and complexity of the church, and particularly, I guess, thinking about your comments in relation to Pope Francis's aspirations of a synodal model, I just wondered whether that structure itself needs to change, and if so, how you might see that happening.
Well, thank you, Liz. Yes, there are structures that need to change. And the Pope himself says that structures that don't enable evangelization, that don't aid the mission of the church, are structures that we don't need. Now, in the old Roman mindset, it used to be that the church mustn't change, but the church members need to change. So it's the sinners in the church, but not a sinful church. Now, since the Second Vatican Council, that distinction has been debunked. So yes, there does need to be structural changes. There does need to be structural reforms. What kind of reforms? Well, I think we need to go back and look at at early Christianity. We need to try and understand how the early Christians lived and look at those structures. And I think that's what we're being urged to do post-COVID. That's what Pope Francis is talking about, how we can go back to the missionary simplicity that we find in the early church, and ask some serious questions about which structures are helping evangelization and mission and which aren't. Now, of course, this becomes very complex and difficult, but that is what the church and the mission of the church is all about. And it is a church in constant need of reform. So I think we do need to tackle the mentality that says the church is perfect and doesn't need to be reformed structurally. It does, and Francis is saying that. It is about how we do that. And I think synodality is crucial here. And I think the process that started in Australia in the Plenary Council is very important. And I think I already know that the questions around governance are being looked at. So I think, yes, the structures need to be reformed, but I think we need to be aware of the complexities and difficulties within that at the same time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. It's a fantastic question. Coming to us from Forbes, Matt, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jasmine. And thank you, Chris. I'm really enjoying this whole evening. So it's fantastic. Look, my question is about journeying closely with Pope Francis. Over your time of journeying with Francis, what's one moment or image which might capture his vision? Maybe something that stood out for you.
Thank you, Matt. There are many things that capture the vision of the Pope's of his mission. I would say, for me, the most moving experience I've had is when I travelled with the Pope to Central African Republic, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. And when the Pope normally goes to a country, he's greeted by the whole kind of apparatus of the state, the trumpets playing and the army and all the rest of it. Central Africa was in the middle of a civil war when the Pope went. and there was hardly anyone to greet him at the airport, and the airport was derelict basically. But then when we got out onto the streets of Bangui, basically the whole of the country seemed to be there. And the Pope came with a message of reconciliation and peace. And what struck me was that the power of the papacy is most evident in the most, how can we say, in the poorest countries, in the most marginalized communities. And that, I think, offers a message to us that actually, when we take the message of the gospel to the most vulnerable and to the most marginalized, that is when it can come alive. And so it was that visit to Central Africa that will always stay with me, and I think really crystallizes what the Pope stands for.
Oh, that's fantastic. So thank you very much, Chris.
There are many more, and I would love to. I would love to share more.
Thank you, Chris.
Actually, can I share one other thing?
Please do.
This is, I hope I'm not. I don't think I'm going to break any confidentiality with this, but I do know that when the Pope hears confession, I was very moved by this story. The Pope heard confession of someone who it was quite a serious thing that they wanted to go to confession about. And at the end of the confession, the Pope said he gave advice, very meaningful advice. And at the end, he didn't say, right, now say the act of contrition. He said, let's say the act of contrition together. And I thought, wow, that I think sums up the Pope's pastoral approach.
Thanks, Chris. And listening to you talk about being there in Africa actually gives me goosebumps. Fantastic. I'm going to hear from some more of our young people now from St. Joseph's College. There we are.
Hi guys, a lot of us were wondering here, being young people and all. So the youth of today are happy to go out and help others, like in the community, but quite reluctant to go to Mass on a Sunday. We're just wondering what the church can do to, encourage us more, I suppose. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and it's great to have a question from St. Joseph's College. Many years ago, I was on a rugby tour with my school, and we played Joey's. Got beaten very badly, I have to say. Anyway, I think that's a crucial point in question, and I think that we do need to recognise that the crisis that we're in the church is not just a crisis of structures, etc. It is a crisis of faith in many respects. And so I think it's about saying that if you are involved in the social action of the church, that needs to be rooted in something as well, and that is rooted in something. Now, of course, people can do good works without being believers, but I think that in the context of the challenge of the church, it should be that we, of course, invite young people and others to be involved in the social action mission, but that we try and link that and root that in faith, and that we show that it is rooted in faith. And I think that is the challenge, and we shouldn't be afraid, I think, of asking a question. Well, okay, you want to be involved in this project or this social action work. Why not come to Mass? Why not see where the gospel passages are that inspire us to do this work? So I think it is about seeing that there is a crisis of faith, as well as that is not going to be just solved through doing the social action stuff. We do need to recognize that crisis of faith, and we do need to challenge people and to encourage them to look at what is inspiring, what inspires the church to have this radical message.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joey's. We have some more questions now here. Going to ask for Peter Halls from Canberra to join us.
Hello, Chris. Sorry about that. We just have to adjust a few things here. At the risk of embarrassing you, there's a few people behind me, a few blokes who have a bit of a man crush on you, but thanks for making the time available to be with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, right. There's two questions I had up there. One was to do with the plenary council. You have a sense of optimism about that. It's heartening to hear, but one of the things that we were sort of, a messaging that came out early on was kind of don't get your hopes up too much, because the whole synodal process is locked in canon law, there's restrictions on it, etc., and it has its limitations. So if you can talk a little bit more about the optimism that you have around the synod, the plenary council here in Australia. And the second thing was to do with just the significance of the, if I can call it, the threat from the right in the US. It gets a lot of airplay, of course, it gets a lot of media attention, but just how, and I guess in one sense you can say, well, if I don't like what the current Pope is saying, just wait a little while. And Francis kind of suggested at the beginning of his pontificate that he would be, he saw a limit to it. He didn't sort of see himself going through to the end of his life. So I guess those two things, the optimism you have about the plenary, and secondly, the just the extent of that threat from the right.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you for those questions. I suppose I'm optimistic about the plenary council, because at least it's a start. You know, the Pope has called for synodality at every level of the church. It's not just church by meetings and more committees. It is a style that he wants to see embedded. It's a new way of being the church. And the reason why I think it's encouraging to see the plenary council is because at least the church in Australia is taking a step on that journey. I look around the world, and there are some parts of the church where bishops and others are sitting on their hands and saying, well, you know, it doesn't apply to us. Now, there's going to be a synod on synodality due to take place next year. It may be postponed, it's not clear. But that synod on synodality, which is going to set the roadmap for, I think, the future shape of the church and its decision making, is going to be informed by the local synod processes. So now I'm sure the plenary council is going to have the usual difficulties that any church process like that will have. There's going to be disagreements, divisions, people trying to kind of stop it in its tracks and all the rest of it. But I think the important thing is it's a start, and I think people probably shouldn't have their hopes too high, and maybe I'm optimistic because my hopes are not too high, but I am optimistic that there's been a start, and that whatever happens with the plenary council, it can build something for the future, and it can also inform the rest of the church. Of course, the plenary council was born out of a sense of crisis in the church following abuse scandals. I mean, this is why synodality is so important, because the abuse crisis has exposed the failures institutionally of the church in decision making, and these need to be addressed. We're not going to just deal with this issue through different structures, and what I mean is not simply through policies and structures. We need to look at how to reform and renew the church in a much more profound way. So I am optimistic because the journey has begun with the plenary council, and then the threat from the right. Well, it is a real threat, which is why I write about it in my book in so much detail. It's a threat because the people who wish to oppose reform and renewal are in powerful positions, particularly in Rome, particularly in the Vatican. The people who oppose Francis have a big megaphone in parts of the Catholic media, so they can influence the conversation. They can push forward with certain appointments. They can block things, etc. So we have to recognise that threat is real. But I think that Francis, by opening up these synodal processes, in a sense, he has rather than taking on the opposition head first, he's created something different. He's created a different process. And I think that's why we're seeing so much opposition, because there's something that now is out of their control. Now, I don't think it helps all the time to be sort of thinking between right and left in the church. One of the things that the Pope is trying to do is bring about, I think, reconciliation in many ways. And so I think synodality actually offers a way of working through divisions in the church. So without synodality, people, I think, become more entrenched in their camps. I think a process like the plenary council and others can actually offer a way of bringing two sides together. Okay, they may not agree, but they can find some reconciliation and some way forward. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the reconciliatory power of the synodal process as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think also that what you're pointing out is what came through on his writing on Amazonia, because it was maybe there's a third way we've yet to see, and allowing the opportunity for that third way to emerge.
Absolutely, and the Pope's work is I don't think it'll be complete at the end of his whatever happens, however long he has as Pope. I don't think it'll be complete. It's always going to be an unfinished project, and it will be up to the popes and the Church of the future to take it forward.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Thank you, Peter. Chris, you've opened up the conversation and started with some engaging dialogue about the plenary council. I've got a question here from our chat, directly from Brian. He asks, what is one reform you would urge for us on the Australian Plenary Council?
Well, I would look at something around the role of women in the church. I think something concrete, something different that gives women a decision-making influence in the church. That's what I think needs to be front and center. And I also think that whatever the outcome of the plenary council, that those involved should say, this is only the beginning of the journey, that the plenary council should lead on to perhaps a more permanent and formal structure that allows lay people in the Australian church a voice. So it should only be the start. That would be what I would insist, and to ensure that women are given a greater position of responsibility in the church.
Thank you, Chris. And I know that Pope Francis spoke about that in his most recent publication as well. So thank you. Kathy from St. Greg's, coming to us from Campbelltown this evening.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, Chris. I'm here with my colleagues, both religious and lay, in southwest Sydney. And our question is, what do we do when we're faced with this opposition that you've spoken about? You said that the threat's real and that the opposition's in powerful positions, and we're feeling that in our local context. So our question is, what do we do in our local context when we're faced with this?
Well, I think, as Jesus says, be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. I mean, I think it will require to pick your battles, but to also stick to your guns. I don't know the specifics of what is being faced in your context, but I think it is important that, you know, not to lose heart, and to remember that one of the things that the Pope always says is that time is greater than space, and that sometimes just by sticking it out, the solution emerges. And I also take inspiration, I think, from St. Mary MacKillop, who had serious clashes with authority and hierarchy. And, well, I think we can see that her vision and message has won out in the end.
Absolutely. Thank you for those words. And yeah, we do stick to our guns, but with the Spirit with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have another question now from our chat box coming from Vanessa. Vanessa would like to know, she's interested in how the church can affect or influence climate change.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. I think that's a crucial issue which the Pope wants to see the church playing a vital role in. I think there are various ways. I think, I mean, first of all, I think it's about, in the local context, taking the steps that are needed around sustainability. I know that the church in England and Wales has moved to green energy supply, for example. I think it's about both. I mean, just at the very general level, I think it's about both talking the talk and walking the walk. I think one of the problems with people who advocate for protection of the planet is that so often they're accused of hypocrisy. Oh, well, they've flown in a private jet to, you know, some conference to talk about climate change. I think what the Pope has shown, and I think what our Christian faith shows, is how to integrate sustainable lifestyles. So how to not just talk about climate change, but actually to be a living witness of what it is to live simply, and to not just talk about the issue, but actually how to really embed it into our lives. And I think, you know, there was a French politician, not a believer, who said that there will be no ecological conversion without spiritual conversion. So to change our lives, to be more mindful and to protect the planet requires an inner conversion. And as Christians, we have the tools to offer people on that, and we have the tools to witness to that.
Thank you, Chris. I have another question now from our chat box coming to us from Simon in Perth. Chris, Simon's wondering, are you able to comment this evening on what the LGBTQIA, you know, them not having church blessings?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, this is a very important and contentious issue that I think the Vatican and Rome have handled very badly. So as I'm sure everyone's aware, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican's Doctrine Office, put out a ruling that said the Church cannot bless same-sex couples, and this was authorized by Pope Francis. Now, the Pope has taken a very different approach in the past when it comes to ministry to LGBT Catholics, and he is focused on accompaniment, integration, not focusing on simply the adjectives of the person, but on the noun, on the person. And I think that's the approach that the Pope wants to take, a person-centered, compassionate approach. Now, we've had, since that ruling in Germany, I'm sure you've seen, the priests in Germany saying, well, we're going to bless couples anyway. So I think in many respects, that ruling has, it hasn't ended the discussion on the matter. It's only, I think, further fueled discussion and debate, and in many cases, defiance. So I think on this point, and I go back to the synodal idea that the Church needs to, I think, find a new way of approaching the question of LGBT issues and matters in a spirit of dialogue, not throwing away what the Church teaches about marriage being between a man and a woman, but neither should we have the harsh and condemnatory language that we've seen in the past from some Church figures and some institutions. So this discussion is an ongoing one, and I think that it's far from over. And watch this space, because I know that Pope Francis was not happy with how that statement from the Vatican came out, and he has subtly tried to correct it. And I think there may be more on the way on that area.
Thanks, Chris, and certainly thank you to Simon in Perth for raising that question and sharing it here this evening. We now have Igor from Mount Carmel. Welcome.
Hi there, Chris. I think we really enjoyed our group here, the insight that you had, the human insight of Pope Francis, and sometimes we don't hear those stories when we read, encyclicals and those type of things. But I guess my question is centered around creating equilibrium between, yes, we have to look outward, yes, we have to let Jesus out, but the growing, I feel in my own classroom and as a young Catholic, secularism is growing. Anything goes, that type of culture is happening within our society. So how do we ensure that, yes, we open the doors and windows to seeing outwards and helping those in most need on our peripheries of our society, but also ensuring that we don't fall into the trap of modern relativism?
Yeah, I think you raise an absolutely vital point, Igor. I mean, I'm not saying, oh, we just open the doors and everything's going to be magically great. I'm not saying that. I don't think the Pope's saying that. But when you look at, say, the challenge of secularism and living in a post-Christian culture, I think the worst thing that the Church can do is simply say we've got to batten down the hatches and become more sect-like in our approach, to just shut away the world. That's, I think, the worst approach here. We need to enter into a creative dialogue. We need to listen to what people who say they don't believe are saying. What are they arguing from? What are the philosophical positions that they are putting forward? And how can the Church respond? I mean, we have, as Catholics, an incredible tradition of faith united to reason. Our theology is based on very strong philosophical foundations. And so when we're arguing positions of faith, we're not arguing those positions from some kind of irrational framework, as some secularists would like to say. we're arguing those positions grounded within a philosophical idea and framework. So the position of Richard Dawkins that every religion is mad superstition and should just be ignored is factually totally wrong. And I think we need to make that point. We shouldn't be afraid of entering in to that dialogue with the secular world and with the non-believing world. That, I think, is part of the mission of the church. But it is up to the communities in each country to devise the best strategy. This is why the synodal approach, sorry to keep going on about it, but this is why it's so important. Pope Francis, who comes from Argentina and is in Rome, in the Vatican, he doesn't know about the aggressive secularism in the same way that you would, and so that's why it's so important that we take the initiative that the Pope is trying to encourage people with, and come up with the plans that are suited to our local context. So this whole question of secularism, non-belief, the growth of non-believers, this is something that must be addressed within the context of Australia, similar in the UK and elsewhere, because I don't think we can expect the Pope to issue, and he doesn't see his role as doing that, as issuing specific diktats on how to deal with that. He's saying it's up to the local churches to come up with responses, and I think we've got to do that. And I think we've got to see secularism, non-belief, post-Christian society. This is a periphery that the church must go out to.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you to Igor for posing such a relevant question for us here in Australia in all our schools. We have had many questions in the chat this evening, and thank you to everyone for posing your questions and the consideration that was put into those. But our final question this evening will come from Liz in Brisbane.
Oh, hi, Chris. Thank you for a great discussion this evening. I know that you've talked about the battles that Pope Francis seems to be facing all of the time. So what do you think, or how far do you think that Francis can realistically get when he faces so much clerical opposition?
Well, thank you, Liz. I think, of course, it's difficult, and I think one of the reasons why I wanted to outline the opposition was to show some of the limitations that the Pope has to work in with and in, and that's why I think that his mission to reform the church is something that is not just a one-man operation. It's something that includes everyone. How far can he get? Well, I think he's already made a lot of progress, and I think a lot of the reforms that he has implemented are irreversible. And to give you one concrete example, the appointment of cardinals. Now, when the Pope appoints a cardinal, it's a bit like succession planning, because he's appointing the people who get to vote for his successor. Now, Francis has appointed more than 50% of the cardinals who will elect who comes after him. And the vast majority of those cardinals that he's appointed, in fact, all of them, they come from far-flung corners of the globe. They're from unexpected places. They're church leaders who don't expect to be, or wouldn't have expected to be, cardinals. And I think that's very important. And all of them are known as pastoral leaders with credibility in their local areas. So whoever comes after Francis is going to be chosen by this group. And so I think the reforms that the Pope has sought to bring about are likely to be taken forward by, well, I think they will be taken forward by a future Pope. He's sowing the seeds of the reform. Now, there are people who think that Francis has not done enough to embed his reforms structurally. And of course, there is a danger and a possibility that a new Pope could come along and reverse what Francis has done. But I remain hopeful about the direction of travel for the Church has now been set by the Pope. Because, as I said, it's not just his mission alone. He's linked his reforms to, I would argue, to biblical principles, but also the Second Vatican Council, which set the blueprint for the Church in the contemporary era. So he's trying to implement the council. And I think we have to remember that a council takes a century to be implemented. So we're 60 years in. And I think this pontificate has been about implementing the vision of the council. And I think that the Pope has, in his 8-year pontificate, set the course for the future. And I don't think the Church has a reverse gear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Chris. So, Chris, do you have any final words for us here in Australia?
I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's taken part in this Zoom call, and I have really appreciated all the questions and the comments. I'm sorry I couldn't answer more of them, but it's really inspiring to hear from you all, and thank you, and keep the faith and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Chris. And Chris, I would just like to thank you personally for your truly insightful reflections here this evening. You've given us a real glimpse into the future of what our church going forward looks like, and what does it look like for us not only just to survive, but to thrive, in particular for women and for our youth here and everywhere. So now, to formally thank you, Chris, I'd like to invite Brother Peter Carroll, Provincial and leader of the Marist Association, to offer his own words to you of gratitude.
Thanks very much, Jazz. And Chris, thank you very much for your incredible presentation tonight. What I value is that you've been able to distill Pope Francis's spirituality and his pastoral theology for the Church. And that gives us great heart, because I believe that Francis is a great gift to the Church. He is responding decades later, but certainly responding very, very actively, very courageously to the Vatican Council agenda. Our association, I suppose, really, for me, is one way that we can help promote that agenda even more, because we are an inclusive community, we are outward focused, and we are at heart evangelizers, teachers and evangelizers. So what Francis says is so relevant for us, so relevant. And in fact, as you were talking, I just grabbed Evangelii Gaudium off the shelf, and I just went to the first page, and the starting point for Francis in that letter was, I invite all Christians everywhere at this very moment to a renewed personal encounter with Jesus Christ. I ask all of you to do this unfailingly each day. And that's the call that we as Christian disciples and as Marists have. We need the conversion that the Pope is calling the Church to. And we are the Church. Our conversation tonight, our participation, the questions, all indicates that we are really committed to the future of the Church, and we want a vibrant, hopeful, outward-looking, missionary Church that's going to be relevant to young people and, in fact, to all people. So, to members of the association, it's up to us. We are the Church. if what we want is clear in our minds, then we have to work positively for it. I think it was maybe Gandhi who said, be the change you desire. So we need to act. We need to be the church that we want to be. So Chris, thanks for helping us, ponder that today. And I also want to thank Jazz Brown, for her leadership of this today. And I know behind the scenes, there's been the MLF team and Marco Farrell, and I'd really like to thank them. So thank you to everyone, but it's particularly the 199 groups, and I think there's a number of groups, there's many more people than that, who have gathered for this Marian Lecture 2021. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Brother Peter. A special acknowledgement and thank you to our students at St. Michael's in Daceyville, Hazel, Aidan and Sophie, and our college captains from St. Teresa's in Noosaville, Fran and Joe, Cara from MIM in Adelaide, and Greg from Sydney, Marist 180. Thank you all for being able to contribute here this evening and the questions that you posed for Chris. And finally, a very special word of thanks to you all for being here this evening. Your engagement, your dialogue, the conversation, it's truly been a wonderful evening. A recording will be made and will be sent to you in the coming days from the MLF team, and we thank them for all their work with this. In this special month of May, as we continue to honour Mary through our Marian devotions, may you all be blessed by her grace. I leave you now with the beautiful words of the hymn dedicated to Mary, the Salve Regina, composed by our very own Brother Michael Herry and sung by the International Marist Brother Choir for the bicentenary of the Marist Institute in 2017. Good evening and God bless.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostra salve, antenamus Nobis